Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is a discussion of the Perforating School chapter, Digital Literacy in an Arts and Crafts class by Arne Olaf Nygaard from Norway. And this is a really enjoyable read for me. I loved a lot of these issues are very near and dear to my heart, and probably to you as well. I've read some of the nuggets, and I can see that a lot of you are in the same place I am, struggling with a lot of these issues that Nygaard raises. So definitely some good material here for a deeper discussion. So one of the things he talks about at the beginning is this tendency to have a polarizing view of this debate. You're either all for it, sort of a booster as the term, or you're all against it, a doomster tradition. So that's kind of fun, but also I'm sure you know people that fit into one of these camps, right? Either you want to have any gadget that you hear about, oh my God, I got to get that into my classroom right away. And then you got the people that want to get rid of all the technology, just get back to the whiteboard. If they even use a chalkboard, maybe they don't even want that level of technology in the classroom. So obviously this author wants to get well beyond that sort of simplistic polarizing view. He quotes somebody named Neil Selwyn, who talks about this idea that technology itself is the agent of positive or negative change. I've seen this described as well as the technological determinism, the tendency to ignore the people involved and the social context, and just focus on this bit of technology. And sadly, this is still a pretty prevalent view, right? This idea that you can make your teaching better if you just add technology. Without any kind of critical look at, well, what kind of technology? How are you going to use this technology? Why this particular technology? You know, that there's all these sort of questions that don't get asked. Maybe if we updated all the computers, maybe that would improve the pedagogy. Right? Same sort of thing. Ignoring the actual uses that people are putting this technology towards. And so this author, I think, I'm absolutely buy this argument, hook, line, and sinker. We need more critical accounts of the actual uses of the digital technologies in schools. It's not a question of just add technology and stir, right? So definitely that's, couldn't be more supportive of that view. And now, again, I wanted to point you at some of the theoretical framework we have to work with in this article. Quite a few pieces that are mentioned. We got Geertz, the anthropologist, notion of thick descriptions. Now, this is something that gets brought up a lot. And the author talks about this problem. One approach to studying a question like this is what's called the ethnographic approach. And a lot of compositionists have used this approach, ethnography. The problem is, of course, they are compositionists, not anthropologists, and they don't have nearly the level of discipline-specific training to do this kind of work. I face the same thing when I write these books on video game history. People say, well, Matt, come on, you're many things, but you're not a historian. You don't have your PhD in history. You don't know a lot about all this history, all the methodologies that work in history, and all that sort of thing. That's the same problem with these ethnographers. So, there's some people that want to say, well, we can just dismiss all of their research because they don't have that discipline-specific training. Of course, they want to reject that. You don't need to have a degree in this, in anthropology to write a good, useful ethnographical study, I think is what the author would say here. And I agree with this. And we can just take the sort of the basic idea here of a thick description, for example, just one aspect of this issue. So Geertz talks about these, I guess you'd call them anthropologists, that go and they just sort of describe what they see, and they try to be objective, I suppose. Just tell me what you see. Don't try to spin it. Just be the camera. And Geertz wants to reject that view and talk about, what we have here, these patterns of specific actions in their contexts. And so I think that idea is why a lot of compositionists and other members of the humanities have sort of latched on to onto this view, and it's something you can use as well in your papers. The author Nygaard also talks about new literacy studies, which again is something very applicable, easy to take and to use in your work. This definition of literacy as various practices that are given meaning in concrete social and cultural contexts. So that's not an individual skill or cognitive aptitudes. And so again, I think a lot of us have this default view, what is literacy? And we think about someone being illiterate or literate, and we think about, well, let's see, how can we determine if you're literate or not? Let's give you this objective test. Let's say fill in some bubbles, and then we'll find out. So for the NLS folks, that wouldn't make any sense at all. What are you going to, what can you prove with that bubble test? Nothing really. Literacy in and of itself is meaningless. We need to look at a specific use. What is the particular social and cultural context you're looking at? What it means to be literate as a ethnographer, for example, is a very different kind of literacy than, say, pretty much anything else, right? I guess we could actually, the more I think about it, the ethnography example is kind of a good example. What he was just saying about Geertz makes a lot of sense in this idea here, right? So you got the one social and cultural context of being a professional anthropologist, going to an anthropologist convention or a conference, right? So they would have a different understanding of what it means to be literate in ethnography than someone doing an ethnographic study in a composition conference, if that makes any sense. So hopefully I haven't just completely confused everyone. I think I'm a little confused at this point. And then we talk about James Paul G. I think that's James. I hope that's James Paul G. There's not too many G's out there. This notion of big D and little d discourses. So the idea of to be fluent in a discourse or to be a member of a discourse community, I guess. It's a lot more to that than just the language being used, being able to read it and write it. It could even be body language, the clothes that you wear, gestures, and all this stuff being very limited to, I would call it kairos. It's a sort of rhetorical term for that, sort of sense of timing, being at the right place and time for that to work. I've also seen it referred to as tacit knowledge. So you got all this, if you want to be going back to this ethnography example for one last time. So you could read a bunch of books about ethnography. You could learn a lot of stuff in the class about it. But really, being a lot of it you would pick up just by associating with other ethnographers, right? And it could be something like even the clothes that you wear that might help to people to identify you as such. Okay, so enough about that. Moving into this computers in the classroom, discourse, big D again. So that's a nice segue there. So if you look at, and this is true today, if you look at all these different tools that are out there, Canvas, D2L, clickers in the classroom, even the document cameras that are in the classes, all this stuff, there's a lot of money to it, right? It's going to cost a lot of money. I was just having a conversation about those little panels in our classrooms here at SCSU where you can sort of toggle between, do you want the computer? Do you want to mute the screen? Do you want to show the document camera, laptop? Those little panels there. I'm going to say something like $10,000 for those. I'm wondering if that's an exaggeration. Could it possibly cost that much for that thing? But anyway, a very expensive piece of technology. So you think, you could do a lot of stuff with the $10,000, right? Do you really need that piece of technology that bad? What's it contributing? And of course, the argument would be, yes, of course we need that. It saves a lot of time, I guess. You don't have to fiddle with the remote control. You don't have to go over lock the door yourself. You can just press a button to lock the door. I guess you can easily switch. I mean, I could sort of see it, right? If you had to, if you want to hook your laptop, having to use a bunch of cables to do that instead. Okay, maybe that's taking a lot of time. Or just more generally speaking, take the document camera. So you could say, well, I need that document camera because it makes it a lot easier. I don't have to go to the photo. I don't have to make all these photocopies of material that I'm going to show the whole class, right? Save a lot of time. It would improve learning because we could zoom in and all this sort of stuff. So anyway, that you sort of get the idea, right? It's usually thought about in terms of a cost-benefit analysis, I would say. And just while we're on this piece, I was really have to admit, I just love this little quote from Marshall McLuhan about the horseless carriage syndrome. And we talked about that before in here. This idea just taking, so you got this new technology and you're just basically trying to recreate what you already had before. As I talked about electrifying the book, blackboard, electrifying the blackboard. So instead of really thinking about what the technology affords, you're just sort of repurposing it for what you could do already. And I don't think that's a very creative way to look at technology. So anyway, I thought it'd be fun for us to apply this to our Husky Compact. So you've probably been hearing about this. It seems like every time I turn around, I'm hearing about this Husky Compact. So part of this compact concerns technology. So I thought it'd be fun for us to look at what it says about technology and think about these Boomster and Doomster traditions and all the other things we've been talking about here so far. So this is the compact. So technology is ever evolving. It is essential to communication, and it is used every day to improve efficiency, better balance work life, and access information. And so that piece to me sounds very much like, I guess what you'd call that uncritical view, but it goes on. Specifically, it goes on to say, critically evaluate technology and its impact on society. So that doesn't sound just like a booster tradition to me. Effectively use and integrate general and discipline appropriate technologies. So again, that seems to be showing awareness that not all fields use technologies the same way for the same reasons, right? Gain the confidence and skills to embrace and use technology now and in the future, and recognize the ethical implications of technology. Now, these 4 points here seem to me to be in line with what Nygaard wants to argue and what these sort of where he's coming from theoretically, but I wanted to let you respond to that as well. Do you think our Husky Compact, what we're trying to do with this compact, is in line with Nygaard, or are we still falling into one of those Doomster or booster traditions? All right, so moving on in the article, a couple other things I wanted to talk about here. Anne, apparently the names have been changed here, but she's teaching these classes, and her idea, or I guess what makes her class different, is that she's using a blog. And of course, I've done this in my classes as well. And one of the main impetuses for doing this is that if you have students post work on a blog, then of course it's out there. Will people care enough to go and check it out? That's another question, but maybe that just a possibility that you think somebody besides the teacher and your classmates might see this blog, might inspire you to put a little more thought into it, to put a little more care into it, because again, you don't know who might see it. So that's part of that. Also, the idea of it being more authentic. So she quoted, or this author quoted a student that was sort of complaining about how a lot of other classes, their work, they did all this work and it just goes into the teacher's drawer. It doesn't really do anything after that. It's just sort of a hoop that they jump through. Whereas having it out there in the blog, maybe that will have some effect on their career options on down the line. Maybe it will allow them to engage with others in what I would call a more authentic fashion. What happens with my blogs, my classes, sometimes people from outside the classroom that are interested in that subject matter will engage with the bloggers, have conversations with them, and they're not interacting with them as the same way a teacher would with a student, or even with a student would to another student, but as people that are interested in that subject matter. So I think that's I think that's great to do that kind of stuff. But again, what do you think about it? Do you think it's? Some people have actually argued with me this is not good. Everything should be behind a password. You should never put the students' work out there. They're just students. We should protect them. What if they're embarrassed by this later on? So anyway, I'm just want to know what you think about this. Would you have your students do a blog like this? Why or why not? And then to wrap up here, a couple other things. But one point is this idea of digital natives, and this is something I've hammered on repeatedly. I hate this idea that this easy assumption that seems to be everywhere that as a teacher you've got nothing to teach your students about technology. They're much more tech savvy than you are. They teach you about computers, you have nothing to teach them. I just think this is completely wrong. If you just talk to students, yeah, sure, some of them are very tech savvy, but I know a lot of students really appreciate this, and they're learning, just like this author says. I've had the same experience, and I've heard this many times. Maybe they never heard of, they didn't even know what a blog was until they took your class. Maybe they thought they did. Now they're a lot savvier about it. Or even things like how to do a Google search. You can do a lot more than just type in the phrase, right? There's all these, you could say this, not this, put things in quotation marks, even something like that, or how to use Microsoft Word comments. Basically, there's all of these things that you probably know how to do that your students don't know how to do. So I agree. I think this is I never want to assume that these students that know all this stuff, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I think that's an easy assumption to fall into, and I think it's probably more damaging to students than anything else. I've had a lot of you in my office saying, well, I don't know how to do this, please help me. It wouldn't have been silly if I said, oh, well, how old are you? You should know this stuff. You're a digital native, right? It's kind of just prejudice, in my opinion, to have that kind of view. Okay, so to wrap up here, oh wait, before I go there, I do want to ask this. Can you tell me about a time when you maybe were teaching your students and they learned something about technology from you? All right, so to wrap up here for real this time. So this is the question, right? So you're blogging, you're good at this, you're making all these blogs, so what? How does this transfer to writing better essays or whatever, better resumes or whatever it is they might actually have to do once they're in the, quote, real world? The author kind of has a snappy response to this. I'll just quote it in detail here. So, knowing that you are a good writer in one context may make you believe you can be a good writer in another context, even if being a good writer means different things in each context. So this, I don't know quite what I think about this line of argument. I guess you call it transferable skills, right? So yeah, maybe you didn't really practice the 5-paragraph essay in your class, but it doesn't matter because your students got really good at blogging. They developed a sort of skill set there. They developed a confidence in themselves, and that ultimately is more useful to them when they do have to sit down and write a resume. Having that confidence will be more important to them than knowing some more specifics about comma splices or whatever. So I wonder what do you make of this idea? We could sort of go back to that other article when we were talking about, and some of us have had conversations in my office about this. Well, let's say you had instead of writing an essay, you told students they could write a poem instead, or a short story addressing the same issue, right? Or maybe even draw a picture about it, or make a video about it. And so one line of thought is it's just all about expression. And if you improve your ability to express yourself in any medium, that's going to carry over in all the other media, right? Is it true? Is it not? I don't know. I think it's just, to me, I think the confidence is certainly important. But again, I want to hear your thoughts on this statement here. Do you agree with this or not? And why or why not? So anyway, a lot of good material there for you to ponder, for us to discuss in future Ed Puzzles. So thank you again for listening, and see you next time.